workers. We have interpretation. If you go in the globe icon at the bottom of your screen, there is interpretation in English, French, and Spanish. So who needs it is welcome to use it. Let me just introduce myself. My name is Paola Simonetti. I am the director of the Equality Department at the International Trade Union Confederation. For those who are not yet familiar, the International Trade Union Confederation is the global umbrella representing the voice of trade unions organizations globally. The ITUC has 191 million workers represented in 169 countries and with 340 national affiliates around the globe. So it is a pleasure welcoming you all today for this very crucial conversation on a very crucial theme like migrant workers' rights and migrant workers organizing. Indeed, with this webinar, we want to recognize and celebrate the upcoming International Migrants Day, and also recognize the contribution that migrant workers provide to the trade unions and to the overall society. Yet, migrant workers face really great challenges nowadays, both in law and in practice, and also challenges to organize and get organized, and to collective bargaining as well. But of course, we as trade unions are not giving in. We keep working and we keep engaging in order to better and fully represent migrant worker rights, both within our ranks as trade unions, but also in collective bargaining processes. So, and you will hear that concretely from our colleagues who will share the results of their engagement, the struggles, but also the wins, and the step ahead in order to be really representing the voice of migrant workers in the most effective way. So I would really let me thank all the speakers that will share this important engagement. Thanks them for their availability. And let me also introduce the person who will moderate this important conversation, my dear colleague Todd Brogan, who is the director at the International Trade Union Confederation, director of the for organizing and campaign. So let me stop here, and with pleasure, I'll hand in the moderation to Todd. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paola.
Thank you.
And of course, thank you to the entire Equality Department team for putting this together and helping us with the call. As Paola said, I'm Todd Brogan. I'm the Director of Campaigns and Organizing for the ITUC. And today we're going to have a very necessary conversation on the importance of organizing with migrant workers. And I often say with migrant workers, not organizing migrant workers, because most places we go, migrant workers are already organizing themselves. And it's a matter of figuring out as trade unionists, whether at national level or sectoral level, how we can support, relate, affiliate with, and otherwise include migrant workers in our big union family. Before I introduce the panelists today, which is why you're here, is to hear from the people who are actually doing the work in the field, I did want to set the stage and provide a little context for the discussion. The ITUC for the last year has been undertaking a campaign for democracy. And this is not a campaign simply for liberal democracy or fair elections, as much as that is part of it. It's been a campaign for democracy at work, and democracy in societies, and democracy in international institutions. And if you try to evaluate who has least access to democracy in each of these three arenas, again and again, you'll find that migrant workers rank high on the number of people who are denied the ability to express their democratic freedoms as individuals, denied their ability to express their collective action as workers, denied voice in a lot of the institutions that govern them. And so, as trade unions fighting for democracy, we cannot succeed in pursuing that fight without including migrant workers in the center of it. There's also practical reasons for this. The global migrant workforce is somewhere around 3.5 billion workers, and that's as of a few years ago, that number. Inevitably, it's larger. Uh, sorry, the global workforce, I apologize. The global workforce is about 3.5 billion. The global migrant workforce is about 169 million, a much more reasonable number. But that number is still quite large. Where I come from, for example, the United States, the workforce is estimated at about 133 million, which means there are more migrant workers in the world than there are American workers in the United States. And many of these are in high income countries. Almost 2/3 are in high income countries like the United States for obvious reasons. If you look at how this relates to the size of the trade union movement, the ITUC, which is the largest trade union organization in the world, representing through many of you and through the affiliates at national level, um, almost 200 million members. So when we talk about migrant workers, some of whom are in that 200 million, we're talking about a group that gets very close to the size of the entire trade union membership currently in the world. We often hear in our communities or as trade unionists that organizing migrant workers is really difficult. It requires a lot of resources. We even hear sometimes stereotypes that migrant workers might be resistant to joining trade unions because they come from different sort of social or cultural circumstances. But the truth is that it's difficult to organize workers, period, no matter who they are. And that's why nearly 95% of the world's workforce does not belong to a trade union yet. So what we suggest at the ITUC is that organizing migrant workers is not a matter of difficulty or even of persuasion. Instead, it's an issue of strategy and structure. This is not to say that it doesn't require special considerations. It does indeed. But what we're learning as trade unions and community organizations is that where we see success in organizing workers in general, we can also see success in organizing and including migrant workers. Now, when we look at the world regionally, the varying regions have very different experiences of migrant worker populations. In some regions, they account for a huge proportion of the total workforce. In the Arab states, for example, almost 37%. In North America, 18%. We see in North and South and East and Southeastern Europe almost 16%. So the numbers vary substantially. But we also find that the reasons people have migrated in the first place are quite similar. We're all familiar with the big trends: neoliberal economic restructuring, urbanization, geopolitics, war, climate change. But these issues aren't only affecting migrant workers. In fact, the ILO found in a 2019 report, and I'll quote here, that the changes observed in the labor force participation of international migrants is likely to be generated by the exact same forces that have also been affecting non-migrant populations. So to put that again, the same forces that are affecting all workers are the ones driving migrant workers to move and find work elsewhere. We also have a lot of research and data on the relationship of migrant workers to unions. Migrant workers are 1.3, 1.4 times less likely to be union members. But why is that? It's not because they're often avoiding trade unions. It's because, one, they're hired in very low density sectors, by which I mean sectors in which there is not a lot of unionization rate, not a high unionization rate. They're also often hired for part-time work, which cuts them out of certain employment benefits and certain employment classifications. So among full-time workers generally, something like 30%, we find 30% union density, whereas among part-time workers, we find almost 14%. So you see that the lack of representation is not a choice that's often made. It's a consequence of the types of work that migrants are recruited into countries to do for the larger population. We even surveyed ITUC affiliates in 2022, about 2 years ago, about what obstacles they had to organizing migrant workers. And they really spread, there's no single one that stands out. The largest, which only 19% of people marked as significant, was prohibition. Laws do not allow it. And that, of course, requires legislative action. But almost all of the other obstacles, things like a lack of awareness among migrant workers, language barriers, fear, lack of resources, these are within the control of trade unions, community organizers, and others to actually change. These are not legal obstacles in our way. These are practical and strategic and structural issues. And we also found research that shows that migrant workers want to hear from trade unions. If we look at Europe, which, if you'll recall, I said is one of the regions where we have a very high density of migrant workers, they found that migrant workers in most countries in Europe are actually more likely than their comrades who are not migrants to have confidence in trade unions. So how do we address this? That's what we're going to talk about today. We know from another study conducted in Great Britain in 2019 that there are any difficulties associated with recruiting migrant workers is on us, on trade unions, on union support organizations, on communities, on the way we behave and the strategies that we adopt, rather than the way migrant workers feel towards us. And what you're going to hear today is that from each region of the world is a unique, specific set of experiences, but we'll also talk at the end about the trends we see across them. So with that, I'm going to introduce our first panelist. Actually, I'll introduce everybody briefly, and then I'll go to our first panelist. So we have Jasmine from the Pinay Care Workers Transnational. I see Jasmine there. Hello. We have Jane from CTSP Mauritius, which has just run an incredible migrant organizers campaign. We have Joniel from CUT Colombia. We have Edwin from FNV in the Netherlands. And we have Mikyung from KCTU South Korea, where, of course, South Korea has been in the news because they just mounted an incredible defense of democracy, and KCTU is a big part of that struggle. So I'd like to start first question for Jasmine. As a result of decades of organizing work made possible by the cooperation of trade unions and others in different countries, Pinay Care Workers was formed around December 2022 by migrant workers doing domestic work from the Philippines. And uniquely, it's a transnational labor union of migrant Filipino care and domestic workers. We know, those of us who work in trade union organizing or in the care sector in general know that organizing workers there has specific challenges. And we know that isolation, risk that migrant domestic workers face compounds these challenges. Can you tell us, how have migrant workers united under Pinay? How are you reaching out to new members? How do they become affiliated in the first place when they're in so many different countries? And how do they take part in union activities? Jasmine, the floor is yours.
Hello, good evening. Do you hear me? Okay, I'm from Pinay Care Workers Transnational Union. You know that many Filipino migrant domestic worker in country of destination is not a voter. So no legislators could be willing to legislate a law that will protect our right because for them this is a political suicide. The employers and broker would not vote for them. So, but um, our principle is even we cannot vote, but we have the voice. Recruiting Filipino domestic workers is very important because it helps to build a strong union, adding more workers and educating them. So the recruit is not very, very easy, especially if you don't know about workers' rights and labor laws in the country of destinations. So we started to tell workers something that will make them more interested in knowing about their rights. And what makes the domestic workers join is the awareness that they don't know their rights. So we inform them that they have the right to speak about their unfair working conditions, and they have the right also just like their employers. And this migration work is started in 2000. The migration work of Centro, the Philippine Labor Movement, and Learn, the Labor Education and Research Network, started in 2000 in Hong Kong. So the migration work prioritized organizing and education work in Hong Kong in early 2000, when the organizing continues and labor education, while continuing organizing and educating the union leaders in Hong Kong, they were all Filipino migrant domestic workers. So they applied all what they've learned to organize the Filipino migrant domestic workers. Because of that learning, more workers became educated about their labor and workers' rights. Then there's a lot of changes in policy, and the government in Hong Kong recognized the PLU. PLU stands for Progressive Labor Union of Filipino Domestic Workers in Hong Kong. Then PLU expanded the organizing to different nationalities in Hong Kong. That was the birth of FADWO, the Federation Association of Domestic Workers Union. This federation is also uh, consists of local domestic workers and different nationalities of migrant domestic workers. So because of this successful organizing in Hong Kong, it was inspired from this organizing. It was inspired to form a transnational migrant domestic worker to Filipino overseas migrant domestic workers. So we started to organize the Filipino migrant domestic worker in Malaysia and Singapore. And Hong Kong also expanded organizing in Macau because we have leaders in Hong Kong moved to work in Macau and started organizing a union there and registered in Macau government. And then through partnership with IDWF, the International Domestic Workers Federation, with Centro and FADU in Hong Kong, we've met DCU, Domestic Caretakers Union. In Taiwan, the first local labor union for Filipino migrant domestic workers registered in the labor government in Taiwan. And DCU Unite with Us, the plan to form a transnational. After organizing Taiwan, we went to Bahrain to start the organizing and education work, where we met that time the Kuwait organizer was in Bahrain and attended a conference there. And then we had a talk about the idea of forming a transnational for Filipino migrant domestic worker. So in Bahrain, we had the initial discussion of forming transnational union. Then the Hong Kong organizer then is Ate Sheila and are now a president of Pinay Workers Care Workers Transnational Union, who went to Jordan and started to have a meeting with the Filipino community. She attended also the network there because that network has Filipino affiliated organization. From that time on, we do have regular meetings for all leaders in every country. We organize for the planning of the formation of transnational union, and all these countries organized their representatives, and they all went home to the Philippines in 2019 to have a conference for the formation of the transnational union. So we were supposed to have an early congress after 2019, but due to a pandemic, the launching and formation of Pinay Care Workers Transnational Union was moved to the year 2022 in December. So building this transnational union is really a big help because of the solidarity campaign work issues with United, our local domestic worker organization, and the Philippine Overseas Migrant Domestic Workers Unions are uniting together, and it is a success that now Pinay is the sole representative in the domestic Department of Migrant Workers in the Philippines oversees land-based tripartite consultative council. So we have represented our members in all regular meetings with the Philippine government Department of Migrant Workers. So that's how we unite.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. That's a really interesting example of how we can work across borders with a specific group. And you hear from Jasmine now about domestic work, which is often where we have a lot of calls and webinars about migrant workers and domestic work, but migrant workers don't only do domestic work. And we're going to turn to Joniel from CUT Colombia and UNTD, who's a 36-year-old union leader, originally from Venezuela, who left the country 7 years ago and currently lives in Bogota, Colombia. He's a union leader in a sector where 62% of the workers are Venezuelan migrants, and especially working in platform work, which of course for the ITUC is critical always, but especially this year when we have the beginning of a standard setting process at the International Labor Organization. So I will turn to Joniel now. What are the challenges that Venezuelan migrant workers and immigrants face in Colombia? How are you organizing yourselves? And how do you think global organizations, whether trade union organizations or human rights organizations or others, can actually support the struggle of migrant workers?
Hola, ¿qué tal? Buenos días. Bueno, buenos días aquí en Colombia. Eh, Ciertamente nosotros presentamos es, una gran cantidad de retos y deberíamos partir por decir que debe haber una real inclusión social, no solamente social, tiene que haber económica, cultural y educativa y sobre todo laboral para la población migrante. Eh, Como reto de esa verdadera inclusión, no solamente que se base en un documento que nos permita regularizarnos, que nos identifique como tal claramente en el país donde, en este caso, donde estamos aquí en Colombia, sino que eso debe ser un paso importante, o sea, que nos identifique ese documento es un paso importante ya que nos permite acceder a ciertos beneficios, eh, beneficios públicos, algunos programas educativos, pero realmente los retos de la población migrante, caso de Colombia, están en el mundo del trabajo. Eh, Partiendo directamente por la inspección laboral que debería realizar el Ministerio del Trabajo, eh, que no la hace aún, y cuando hablamos de inspección nos referimos a que se inspeccionan esos lugares de trabajo donde, a esas empresas, mejor dicho, como tal, que contratan a población migrante por menos del salario mínimo. Adicional a eso, lo que se viene hablando en la reforma laboral que se está discutiendo en estos momentos aquí en Colombia, es que el contrato de trabajo sirva para que las personas migrantes que no están regularizadas en el país se puedan regularizar mediante ese contrato de trabajo. En este caso, muchas personas tienen la oportunidad de tener un contrato de trabajo que no están regulares, o si esa reforma llegara a pasar, que está prácticamente discutiéndose en el Congreso, que ya está en el Senado de la República, el migrante podía regularizarse mediante un contrato de trabajo. Los grandes retos también están en eso, en una real inclusión que vaya más allá de un documento que nos identifique. La real inclusión también pasa porque tengamos políticas laborales de acceso al empleo, permanencia sobre todo, permanencia en el empleo, pero también las labores que tiene el Ministerio del Trabajo, que es la inspección, seguir inspeccionar esos lugares de trabajo que siguen siendo inseguros, espacios de trabajo que vulneran los derechos laborales de la población migrante, como el ejemplo más reciente podemos decir lo que es el sector que representa el sector de plataformas, también el sector de trabajadoras domésticas, que es un sector que en su mayoría son población migrante, en el caso de Colombia, que mayoritariamente es población migrante venezolana, y que existe un porcentaje importante de esa población. Entonces son parte de los grandes retos que para nosotros diríamos que debe ser solución, porque no podemos basarnos solamente en un documento de identificación, porque eso es lo que da es saber el número de migrantes que existen, pero no da pocos derechos. Una inclusión más social, cultural, económica, educativa. En en ese orden de ideas. El tema de organización. Hasta la fecha se está organizando en organizaciones muy asistenciales. En el tema de orientación, el tema más que todo de salud, pero muy pocos se están organizando en torno al tema del trabajo. Eso es importante. Pocos sindicatos en el país, yo diría que los únicos sindicatos que agrupan a la población migrante son los de plataformas digitales, que existe un número importante, es decir, que podríamos hablar que un 62% de los trabajadores de plataformas digitales que hacen vida aquí en Colombia son población migrante venezolana. Pero las organizaciones que hoy reciben a la población migrante siguen en la línea de donaciones, la línea de asistencia a urgencia, pero poco se organiza en el tema de sindicato o en lo social, como podríamos decir que en lo social para pelear una agenda de derechos sociales, económicos, culturales, entre otros, pero no se piensa en el tema de derechos laborales. En eso tenemos como el tema de problema organizativo. Y solamente las plataformas, los trabajadores de plataformas son los que se están organizando, o sea, los sindicatos de plataformas son los que están organizando, más que todo en el tema de derechos laborales, pero nos referimos solamente a este sector, al sector de plataformas. Sabemos que existen muchas organizaciones internacionales que pueden apoyar, pero ¿cómo lo podrían hacer? Ya no más que sea un orden, ya hablando más en el orden internacional, por supuesto se espera la financiación en lo económico, pero no una financiación basada en lo mismo. Se necesita una financiación para una agenda de derechos para hacer incidencia en los temas laborales. ¿Por qué no apoyar el mismo Estado? Las organizaciones internacionales pueden apoyar el mismo Estado para que realicen esas labores de inspección, pero específicamente para la población migrante. O sea, hablando del sector de la población migrante. En este caso, en el caso de Colombia, sería mayoritariamente población migrante venezolana. Que hay mucha población migrante venezolana que está en condiciones de vulnerabilidad, incluso en trabajo forzoso o en condiciones de esclavitud. Las organizaciones de orden internacional servirían como para tomar esa agenda de derechos integral, pero adicional también serviría para presionar mucho al gobierno nacional, el gobierno nacional que esté de turno, como para que haga una real inclusión laboral a la población migrante. Cierto, y eso pasa, por ejemplo, el acceso a la educación, eliminar esas barreras para la educación, porque existen muchas barreras para el tema de educación. Sabemos que hay muchos migrantes profesionales, pero no han podido convalidar sus títulos, sobre todo formar el acceso a la educación como a las universidades. Existen muchos retos en el tema educativo de los migrantes profesionales que ya vienen siendo profesionales, pero migraron a diferentes países para que puedan convalidar esos títulos, para poder insertar a esta población al mundo del trabajo. En Colombia ciertamente existe una ley, que es la Ley de Política Pública Integral, Ley de Política Pública Integral de Migración, que muestra claramente cómo los temas laborales y sobre todo sindicales están allí en esa ley. Y es una norma que necesita toda la reglamentación del mundo. Por ejemplo, este gobierno, el gobierno de turno aquí en Colombia, no ha comenzado a reglamentar esta ley. Ciertamente está bien lo que se está discutiendo en la reforma laboral, que claramente habla de un capítulo sobre población migrante, pero vemos mal que todo el tiempo tengamos que crear una nueva norma para poder regular un nuevo decreto. Entonces, esos podría yo como que resumirlo, que son los retos de cómo se viene organizando ahorita la población migrante y sobre todo el aporte que las organizaciones internacionales pueden hacer a este sector.
Thank you, Janiel. And also thank you for I'm getting Spanish in the English channel. Thank you, Janiel, and especially for waking up early today. I know in Colombia, it's 2 p.m. in Brussels, but I know it's much earlier in Colombia. So we're very grateful for you for joining. And I also know we have some good colleagues and comrades on the call who are working with you. I see Yudi I see my colleague Antonio, I see Magali and Ivan from Tuca as well. So we definitely have your back and we'll support you. We also have Rob Ways from Empower on the phone, who's been working on platform work and specifically working with Koot. So you have a lot of friends on the call and we have your back and we'll be there to support you. But also, to your point on other international organizations, I think it's a very clear ask, which is financing is helpful, but there are specific types for specific purposes that we really are in desperate need of. Now we're going to come back to this side of the Atlantic Ocean and hear from Edwin. Edwin is the head of research and enforcement of the FNV, which is the largest trade union in the Netherlands. Before he joined FNV more than a decade ago, he was an international truck driver and studied law. Of course, as he would tell you, the fight for justice for workers could not wait until his study was finalized. So he jumped into the movement with the FNV, and he exclusively works in road transport. Now Edwin is leading the Road Transport Due Diligence Foundation, which aims to investigate road transport and help multinational companies implement due diligence in their supply chain. I don't have to explain why this is so important for migrant workers in the continent, but I will turn it over to Edwin now with a question. Obviously, you've been working with migrant transport workers in the Netherlands for a long time. Can you tell us about your experience organizing migrant workers in this sector? First, what are the challenges that you work with them to face in relation to organizing, joining unions? And what are the different tactics and means that you use to support workers when they're organizing?
Yeah.
I'll leave it to you.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for the invitation in this great panel, an important panel, because I think labor migration happens all across the world in different sectors. But in my sector, road, it's hyper international, where workers maybe work in 3 different countries in one single day. So that also demands for different answers from the trade union. And to maybe cut your questions up in 2, for road transport, we can cut it up in 2, like labor migrants who migrate to the Netherlands, get employed in the Netherlands, and ideally integrate in the Dutch labor market. A truck driver from Romania gets a Dutch employment contract where the trade union would have a mechanism and answers, a mechanism to organize and answers to problems, law enforcement, collective agreements. But road transport is so international these days with our 27 member states. We see over 65 nationalities of drivers on EU roads. And we see that in Europe, in many industries, employers are crying like there is a shortage of drivers. But if you look deeper into these patterns of recruitment, patterns of employment, there is actually a need on cheap drivers. And that's also the challenge for our industry. So we have one part of the medal is FNV, who organize workers who are employed in the Netherlands. And that's complicated as such already with all our challenges. We all know them, language barriers. But it gets even more complicated where, let's say, drivers from Central Asia are employed in Eastern Europe, but exclusively work in Western Europe, then they basically have no link with their country of employment. Now they're from far away countries. They often have no knowledge of domestic or European labor law. And in all these examples we see, it ends up to human rights breaches, human trafficking, forced labor. And it's very, very complicated for the unions to have a systemic organizing answer. Because in Europe, for those who are non-European, we have 27 jurisdictions. Yeah, 27. Yo, somebody at the door. Yo, not a migrant worker. So we have 27 jurisdictions with a helicopter legal framework called the EU. But that's basically a chocolate factory for employers with bad intentions. So, has some examples from today. A worker from Tajikistan being employed in Lithuania, paid $4,000 or $5,000 to even get his job, and exclusively works for Amazon and IKEA in Western Europe. So if he works in Western Europe, which union will organize them? In theory, which union speaks Russian or Central Asian to even communicate with these workers? So to at least start defining an answer, the unions established the Road Transport Due Diligence Foundation to basically advocate for human rights in road transport supply chains, to make the companies who contract these transport companies liable, and to basically use also that as remedy strategy for these workers who are very, it's hard to say, difficult to organize, because in fact, these workers are not difficult to organize because we knock on the door and they're begging to get organized. But in Europe, we have no systemic organizing answer. So we use as informal organizing strategy. So we do not affiliate them to a union because there is no union, and it's no excuse to do nothing. And we push these problems up to these road transport supply chains, which has two unique elements. First of all, there is justice for these migrant workers. B, we work on a systemic redesigning of road transport supply chains where workers are on the steering wheel towards getting to compliance, how to get these companies work according to the rules. And if we then see how effective this is, last year we had 2 unprecedented strikes in Germany, where about 150 drivers went on strike for 10 weeks non-stop. So, and 10 weeks means 10 weeks isolating on a parking, 10 weeks not leaving their vehicle. And in the end, we made this, to say, one big supply chain mess, where this whole topic, this for drivers from Uzbekistan, Georgia, Turkey, Ukraine. So we had 6 nationalities on one parking, 6 cultures, and we managed to make this a supply chain human rights issue. And in the end, all these workers got all their money. That's really unique, that from the most vulnerable drivers in Europe, basically third country nationals, meaning drivers from outside of Europe, employed in countries where they never work, picked up a fight, and we only needed to basically streamline the shit, so to say, up to the supply chain, because these workers are in base so powerful, so dedicated. So I think in Europe we have about 300,000 third country national drivers. If we would have a union tomorrow where to technically organize these people, we would have half of them organized in 2 years. I'm absolutely so what I'm also trying to say a bit. So who works with migrants mostly highly respects them. Every story is different. These people come faster in our hearts than I think workers across the corner. At least it's so in my team. But if you then see, if you strategically help/organize these people, it has impact so much, not only about the lives of these workers. Getting 50,000 on your bank account is a lot of money for me, but if you're from Tajikistan, it's like 10 years of wage, and those are life-changing events. But also giving hope to other workers, and even more important, contributing to redesigning these supply chains. Because these employers who change drivers from Ukraine against drivers from Tajikistan and then from Sri Lanka and India think the union is not interested. And if we look into this, and organize these workers even informally, we have an unbeatable strategy. And that's very, very inspiring, but also very problematic, because every worker who gets his money, 10 of his or her friends will call. And that's also the problematic of the strategy in not having an infrastructure. In Europe, we see union density going down, and the people who need the union most, who would like to join union most, we have no fundamental strategy. So positive on one side, and on the other side, when we see these really highly mobile workers in my environment, that's also complicated.
Yeah, thanks so much, Edwin. Wow, that's an incredible story. I used to organize in the public transit sector in the US and Canada, and we had in some garages we would have 30 nationalities, 6 different common languages, and we found again and again that a little bit of work from the union, making sure things are available in multiple languages, just any indication that the union was actually welcoming people in, and we would see the numbers shift substantially in support. And I think you're right. A lot of times people just don't know that we're willing to fight. And I think you raised also a really interesting question. One, supply chains, but especially the question on sort of informal organization works, but maybe isn't sustainable in the long run. We have to find a way. But as trade unions, of course, any labor law that exists used to not exist until we fought for it and demanded it. And that's why we're having this call today. So thank you, Edwin. We'll come back to you in a bit. Next, I want to turn to Sister Jane. Jane is the General Secretary of the Confederation of Trade Unions of Public and Private Sector Unions in Mauritius, CTSP, as well as an ITUC Women's Committee executive member. Among many other roles, Jane is a member of the Tripartite Committee in Mauritius on Lodging and Accommodation for Migrants. She helped set up the Migrant Resource Center in Mauritius back in 2021, and CTSP and Jane have been on the forefront of advocating for migrant rights in the country. Jane, the CTSP and affiliates have been, I think, doing this work for 2 decades now, and you're also providing specific services designed for migrant workers. It's not just welcoming them into the existing structure, but making sure that their specific needs are met. Can you share with us today how migrant workers first began to affiliate with the trade unions in Mauritius? What strategies did you use to approach them and to establish that trust and provide an inclusive union for migrants? The floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. Yes, thank you, Todd. So yes, my name is Jane Ragu. So the CTSP is a vibrant confederation. Let me put this just to start with. And we like to say that, CTSP makes things happen. So whenever we take the challenge of resolving any kind of issue, if we see that there is some kind of justice that we need to fight for, we go for it and we get the results that we need. So our work, we conduct many visibility action to raise awareness on workers' rights. We denounce wage theft, violations of terms and conditions of work. And through our action, the public at large are aware of our work, and we are largely covered by the local press, radio, TV, written press, etc. So whenever migrant workers, we call them guest workers, have any issue, they either used to go to the police station or talk to their Mauritian neighbors, who in turn will advise them, even the police, to contact the CTSP, because we are the biggest workers' organization, which represent the public and private sector workers in Mauritius, but we also represent migrant workers. So that's how it started for the bigger community of migrants. But well before that, the CTSP used to intervene on specific cases where migrant workers were on strike, or when we meet them at the Ministry of Labor and we see that they are having real difficulty, we offer our support. And through that, from words of mouth that we say, so the migrant workers, they communicate with other comrades, and then they started to come to us. So gradually, as I said, through our support, we created also a WhatsApp group, when each group that contact us are added. And through this, they ask their question, and sometimes some people, they cannot read, and then we do voice messages for them, and then they share with other workers. So now when I'm talking to you on this call today, we represent workers from Kenya, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bangladesh, India, and Madagascar. So our work continues, and one of our biggest challenge that we had in the beginning was the language barrier. Because for Bangladeshi workers, for Malagasy workers, in Mauritius, we speak English and French and the local language. We do speak in Hindi also, But for Bangla, the language, it's very difficult. And we had to recruit someone who speak Hindi, who could communicate to Bangladeshi workers. That was our greatest challenge, because right now in Mauritius, there are more Bangladeshi workers compared to the other countries that I have just said. So yes, we recruited a person who spoke Hindi, who could communicate to Bangladeshi workers. Then through that kind of trust building and getting positive results on reported violation of rights, today we have interpreters, mostly from the workers themselves. For Kenya, there's no issue because they speak English. And then for Bangladeshi now, we have a worker who is married to a local person here who has become our union delegate. So now we don't have any issue for the language barrier that we had before. And then we have a Malagasy lady also, who is married to a Mauritian, and then who help us communicate with Malagasy workers. And we have recruited a migration officer who interact with workers, and who, we have two hotlines, one during the day up to 4 p.m. and then another one which starts from 5 to 8:30 p.m., where the migration officer who is on part-time with us can communicate with workers during the evening. And this migrant officer role also is to record all cases, company, number of workers, various issues reported, take pictures, filing, and follow up. So when we speak on any kind of issues, we always speak with evidence, and we have a record of all the cases that we are speaking of. Just during the COVID period, we had 200 cases of violation of rights that was reported. And we had to bring that before the Ministry of Labor. Most of them have been resolved, and many workers have been sent back to their countries. But specifically for Bangladeshi workers, we still have an issue. Many of them, their contract of work has expired, and they don't have a work permit, but they are still in Mauritius. This is our biggest challenge right now for migrant workers. So after we organize workers and we take up their issues and we record everything through the migration officer, we have a special technical team that take over, who bring the case before the Ministry of Labor, like a dispute settling mechanism and follow up, etc. That's how we do our work. And I can tell you that I have spoken about the language barrier and the trust building, but I can assure you that this is not only this kind of things that we have so many issues for migrant workers. And if we want to really represent workers, we have to say no discrimination, they have rights, and we have to continue to advocate for them.
Thank you so much, Jane. And yet, please keep us informed. We had a colleague from CTSP at the International Trade Union School this summer, Matthew, and he presented on some of the incredible work that you're doing there, and we've received some updates there, but we want to stay informed. And what you said at the beginning really resonated with me. CTSP is a union that makes things happen. In my old union, we had a similar slogan. We would ask the question in all of our trainings: are we a union that things happen to, or are we a union that makes things happen? And we chose to be the latter one. Very, very helpful. Thank you, Jane. Last and certainly not least in the first round of questions will be Sister Mikyung from KCTU. Before I introduce her, I wanted to let those of you listening know that you can put questions into the Q&A function at the bottom of the chat. You'll see a box with a question mark that says Q&A, question and answer. And if you go to that, you'll be able to put in a question. Depending on how much time we have at the end, we will try to have our panelists answer some of those, again, if time allows. And next, I will turn to Mikyung. She's the International Director of the Korean Federation of Trade Unions, which is one of two affiliates of the ITUC in Korea, and represents nearly 1.2 million members from most of the sectors of the economy. She's been representing the voices of workers in Korea, including migrant workers, at countless international bodies and organizing KCTU solidarity actions to defend fundamental rights. And of course, KCTU was part of a larger movement just over the past 2 weeks to militantly defend their democracy against a power grab. So, Mi-Kyung, I can imagine you've been quite busy, but we'll ask you to talk a little bit about the position of migrant workers in South Korea, which is a major destination country in Asia for migrants. And we know KCTU has been supporting the struggles of migrant workers for a long time, for decades, in fact. And in 2015, in the legal recognition of the Migrants Trade Union, which affiliated with KCTU. So can you tell us about this path that KCTU has taken, the Migrant Trade Union has taken, why KCTU decided that it was important to organize migrant workers in unions, and how have you gone about doing this? What sort of results have you seen? So it's a lot of questions, but a little bit about the journey, why this decision was made, some of the strategies you've used, and what the outcomes have been. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Todd. Before I start, I would like to extend my gratitude for the support and solidarity of the ITC and ITUC family all around the world for our fight to stop the martial law and the impeachment of the ringleader of the rebellion, Yoon. There is still a long way to go, and we will continue our struggle until a comprehensive social transformation is achieved. The one thing I want to share about our emergent action against the martial law is the inclusiveness. A broad coalition of all parts of society was immediately formed, and we moved away from using the traditional term 국민, means the Korean national, when naming the coalition. This means many people in the discussion recognize that the migrants are also affected by the martial law, and they should be able to participate in building a new society. And I want to say that this is one of our outcomes of our long-standing struggle for migrant workers' rights. Turning back to the questions I received, yes, Korea is a destination country of migrant workers from 17 Asian countries under the Employment Permit System, EPS in short, and other kinds of programs. While the EPS is often praised because it operates through the government-to-government MOU and reduce the chance for brokers getting involved. But the KCTU has been criticized it for giving employers all the decision-making power and restricting workers' rights, particularly in limit workers' freedom to change of workplaces, thus lead to forced labor. Around 1.3 million migrant workers are working in Korea, and for union density for migrant workers is very low, like 0.5%, while the union density for local workers are up to 14%. And I must emphasize that organizing migrant workers into the trade union was initiated by the migrant workers themselves. The migrant workers' brave actions moved the KCTU members and prompted them to take solidarity action and begin organizing. KCTU's constitution provides, of course, that we aim to achieve the equal rights and equal treatment for the migrant workers. But this written provision started to serve as a call to action when the migrant workers themselves stood up. Let me briefly explain what have been done. In 2001, when Korean trade unions were fighting against the outcomes of the neoliberal labor policies imposed by the IMF as a prerequisite for the bailout program, marginalized workers, including temporary and precarious workers, women workers, and migrant workers, began gathering in trade unions and leading to the launch of the Equality Union, which is the part of the KCTU. And migrant workers formed their own branches within this union. And in 2003, when there were plans to abolish the industrial training system, which is far worse than the EPS, and introduce a new system, undocumented migrant workers across the country feeling threatened by forced deportation and crackdowns began sit-in protest demanding regularization and legalization. About 1,000 people participated in nationwide, And the Equality Union Migrants branch led a 380 days, more than 1 year long sit-in struggle and in Seoul at Myeongdong Cathedral. This momentum led to establishment of the Migrants Trade Union in 2005. However, this was just the beginning of another struggle. Successive union leaders were deported through the targeted crackdowns, and the Ministry of Employment of Labor rejected their union registration application with excessive demand beyond the legal requirements, including the name of the all members and the workplace they work and so on. Because key officials were undocumented migrant workers. So migrant workers maintain the trade union despite the risk of deportation, with many volunteering as union officials. And KCTU began fighting for undocumented migrant workers' right to organize by filing complaints with the ILO's Committee of Freedom of Association and pursuing legal actions. While the government won the first trial, the union won the appeal, but the Supreme Court delayed its ruling for 8 years. During this delay, union officials continued to face deportation and detention. And finally, in August 2015, the Supreme Court recognized the freedom of association not only for the documented migrant workers, but also undocumented migrant workers. And this migrants trade union become legal. Simultaneously, the KCTU began prioritizing the organization of non-unionized workers. And to do this, we launched strategic organizing initiatives, and we consistently targeted the migrant workers for our organizing drives. So MTU is significant as a union composed entirely of migrant workers. They run their own operations and expand membership, organize fellow migrant workers, and represent migrant workers' voices within the union and the KCTU. But beyond this, the KCTU encouraged all affiliated unions to organize migrant workers and support this effort. For beginning, many speakers in this panel pointed out that language barrier is one of the big challenges to migrant workers' organization. So it is the case in Korea as well. So the first thing we do was publishing workers' rights handbook in 10 to 15 languages annually, and conduct various training programs for different targets, including education program, helping KCTU officials understand migrant workers' conditions and their right to organize, and training for migrant worker organizers, and leadership academy for migrant trade officials, and legal education for affiliated organizations, migrant worker counseling offices. So this helped the KCT affiliate to ready to organize migrant workers. And KCTU prepare all organizations and the regional headquarters to actively organize the migrant workers thanks to these activities. And we also work for the institutional reform. For example, we campaign to replace the problematic employment permit system with a rights-based work permit system. And we also conducted activities including exposing rights violation under the EPS through testimony gatherings and public hearings. We also engaged with the UN and ILO, and we also organized the National Migrant Workers Rally, and we also organized some activities in celebration of the May Day. And we also organized some events on occasion of the International Migrant Workers Day or International Day of Anti-Racism, against the racism, etc. So through these activities, we achieved some things, including we successfully secured the court recognition of the migrant workers, not only for the documented, but also for the undocumented migrant workers of freedom of association and right to organize. And we created spaces inside the KCTU for migrant workers to actively participate in our movement. And we also make our affiliates to ready to welcome the migrant workers within their organization structure. And we also highlighted the exploitation and discrimination against the migrant workers under the EPS system as major social issues. And we also achieved a gradual improvement in migrant work related laws and systems, and is notably the employment permit system. Yeah, that's all for now.
That's all for now. That's a ton of work, from the very frontline work to the high-level political work. Thank you very much, Mikyung. And I think what you said at the beginning too about the effect of the martial law on migrant workers and the need for migrant workers to be part of the social transformation is exactly where we started this call, which is the role that migrant workers rightfully have in democracies. And too often, I think globally right now, there's a big discussion. Is democracy good? Does it work, et cetera? But the problem I've had with that discussion is that democracy has never been a completed project anywhere in the world. There's no place in the world where every worker has equal rights before the law to engage in this type of activity. And so the vision that you have in Korea under KCTU is really the global vision, where everybody, regardless of their migration status, has an equal part and an equal role in building their workplaces, their country, and engaging internationally as well. So we have about 20 minutes left, and I have a couple of follow-up questions, and we also have some in the Q&A. Before I turn to mine, we have one in the chat here. I'll click answer live. It's a question to all of the panelists. Do you have legal barriers, social legislation for organizing migrant workers? Some of you have touched on this a little bit, but I really do want us to spend maybe a minute or 2 minute response from those of you who are interested, those of you panelists who are interested, because I think it's not limited to migrant worker organizing, like I said at the beginning, but there's a real mental block in a lot of countries saying, well, they don't have legal status, or they can't legally be elected to union office, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that prevents people from just beginning and engaging in the fundamental work of organizing and associating with workers. So what is the situation in your country legally? And did you wait for law to change? Did you advocate for law change first and then organize? Did you organize so that you could better advocate for law change? What has been the strategy that you've taken? Is there any of the panelists who would like to go first? Otherwise, I will call. Okay, I see Jane and then Edwin.
Well, can I
Yes,
go?
please, Jane, the floor is yours.
Well, here in Mauritius, we have legislation which is called the Employment Relations Act, and in that law, that's how we can create a trade union, and then the trade union has a rules and regulation. So in our rules and regulation, we already organize for local workers, and their membership fee is 100 rupees. About I don't know how much it is in dollars, but it is Mauritian rupees. It is 100 rupees. What we did is that we know that migrant workers won't be able to contribute, but if they want to be member of the union, they need to contribute, and the law is quite clear on that. So we came with a strategy to reduce our membership fee to a symbolic rupee. And with 1 rupee in Mauritius, you cannot buy anything. It's nothing. It's absolutely nothing. So we amended our rules, and we brought our membership fee to 1 symbolic rupee for all migrant workers and for housewives. You see? So that's how we organize them. So that, but when they come to the union, they fill the normal membership forms. They are supposed to pay one symbolic rupee that we pay ourselves for them, or the sister union pay that amount, so that we are before the law, since we have amended our rules and regulations, they are accepted as union members. That's how we have been able to represent them, because we have to show that they are here, because we have to produce their work permit, their passport, and the form that that's how we did it.
That's a great example. Thank you, Jane. I really like the symbolic dues. We often talk about the financial questions of the union are political questions. And so we have to find a way for people to be able to formally join without obviously burdening them or taking from them what they need to live. And that's a really interesting approach. Edwin, I saw your hand next, please.
Yeah, maybe 3 layers of answers. Short. So in the Netherlands, FNV, we can really simple organize who we want to organize. So nobody would prevent if we, it's the answer clear as such. What is further very helpful, in the Netherlands, the unions can carry out legal class actions. So even if very, very precarious workers are involved who want to have justice but are not in the position to share their identity, we can drag companies to court and to bring justice with hiding the identity of workers. In some way, that's very powerful. You could also say that's weak, because workers should. This makes the union weak, because you have a legal argument, a legal instrument preventing to go on strike. So there are 2 types. And then in the scope of the big international road transport industry, that's very, very complicated, where we on daily basis represent workers. In some countries, they would never expect, in Lithuania, they never accept that I would represent somebody from Uzbekistan who comes from Lithuania. Now, very interesting, because if they send me 5 emails, we do not allow you to represent this worker. Now, it's the ideal tool to get up higher in the supply chain, to show to a multinational who has human rights in their DNA, to say, okay, here is even a company who is preventing that this exploited worker is represented. So that's it can also be an advantage in the whole game of bringing justice for workers as effective as possible. And we have examples. For example, there is a transport workers trade union in Lithuania. They have a business case of bringing individual cases to a so-called labor committee, ripping off drivers, and they ask 20% of the money. They manage to fight back, and then they need to pay 2,000-3,000 euros of lawyer cost in the end. If a driver would then get 10,000 euros, they get 3,000 euros themselves. 7,000 goes to the trade union, which I would not call a trade union. But it's also, we have also these types of trade union initiatives in Europe, and that's very nasty, because they then give trade unions bad images. But in general, in the Netherlands, I could say in Europe, we represent who we want to represent.
Thank you, Edwin. Yeah, if I could call on you, Jasmine, how does this work for you as a transnational union with people working in so many different countries, especially in many countries where freedom of association is extremely limited, especially for migrant workers? How have you sort of taken on the approach to the legal issue?
Actually, the 8 countries affiliate member of HINAI, I think only the Malaysia, Bahrain, Jordan, and Kuwait has no freedom of to form a union, but there's freedom of to form a workers association. So for us in Pinay, whether union or association, even it's an association, we organize them, the workers, in the way of how to unionize them in a unionism approach. So that's how we are doing now.
Excellent, thank you. And of course, Mikyung raised a very important example during hers. If you'd like to take the floor again, Mikyung, to reiterate it. But I think that was a really interesting example of the way you fought to make the state recognize the freedom of association.
Sorry,
Yes.
me again.
Sorry, that's from Mikyung.
Yes, yeah, what we did was we just organized migrant workers into the trade union regardless of the legal barrier or legal protection. And through this organized power, we push forward the recognition of the legal rights for freedom of association and right to organize, even for the undocumented migrant workers. But in Korea, we have other types of barrier to organize migrant workers into union. Is the employment status of the migrant workers, or the workplace is size where the migrant workers works. For example, in manufacturing sector, almost all of the migrant workers are working in a very small size factories with 5 or less employees. And it is very, very difficult for them to form a union within their workplaces. So instead of register a union at enterprise level, we launch a campaign to organize the workers at industrial complex wide, where these small and micro-sized factories are concentrated. So this is one of our target for organizing drive when we want to organize migrant workers. And for the care workers, we are working with the PNI to protect the migrant workers' rights of the care workers, which was recently introduced by the ASA pilot program by the Ministry of Labor and the Seoul Metropolitan City. And the problem is we publish a lot of statements, and we made the Filipino government and Korean government to improve the working conditions for the care workers. But the problem is they are isolated, and the ministry and Seoul Metropolitan City doesn't allow for us to approach the migrant workers, because they totally control the movement of the care workers who are working in Korea. So to overcome this limitation, we need a more joint action and joint activity with the trade unions, the organizations like PNI and the trade unions in the Philippines.
Thank you, Mikyung. And I'm going to come back to that, because one of my questions is sort of how each of you have worked with unions in origin countries, where maybe if those of you who are in countries where migrants are coming to work. But Joniel, you as well, I think, took a similar approach, which was organize first and then fight for the reforms and legislation that you needed. But I wanted to give the floor to you too, Joniel, if you had any comments.
Bueno, gracias. Ciertamente, para nosotros, por lo menos yo hablo en primera persona. Yo soy migrante, soy venezolano, vivo en Colombia. También tuve esa idea de que cómo lo tomaría la sociedad, el tema de que una persona que no hace parte, que no es de este país, venga a ser parte de un sindicato. Quizás sería fácil decir de que soy el afiliado al sindicato, a la organización sindical, pero ¿cómo lo tomaría la sociedad pensar de que yo, migrante, soy directivo de una organización sindical? Nosotros en Unidad, que es el sindicato al que represento, la Unión de Trabajadores de Plataformas en Colombia, contamos con 5 subdirectivas en las principales ciudades del país. Cada subdirectiva cuenta con al menos 10 directivos con cargos, de los cuales por lo menos cinco personas son migrantes, hombres y mujeres. ¿Entiendes? Muchos de ellos tenían miedo de ser parte de la directiva, primero porque son jóvenes, ¿entiendes? hay un porcentaje importante que son entre 18 y 32 años, son jóvenes, que nunca han estado en un sindicato, nunca han pertenecido a un sindicato, nunca han sido afiliados a un sindicato y ahora mucho menos nunca han sido directivos de una organización sindical. No fue fácil, sobre todo ahí, como quien dice, insertando el tema de lo que llamamos nosotros aquí la cuota sindical, que es el aporte que debe hacer el afiliado a la organización. Nosotros tenemos en nuestros estatutos el pago de 2.000 pesos mensuales por afiliado, que eso básicamente no es nada. Nosotros aún esa cuota no la cobramos, porque sabemos que es difícil exigirles al afiliado o a nuestros compañeros y compañeras que hagan el aporte de esa cuota sindical, sabiendo que somos un sector precarizado, terciarizado, sin derechos. Entonces, no, nos movemos nosotros con nuestra organización, cómo se mueve gracias a la cooperación internacional. Tenemos algunas organizaciones internacionales que hacen el aporte, que hacen el apoyo, sobre todo en el tema de capacitación, para capacitar a nuestros líderes en formación, en que conozcan cuáles son nuestros propios derechos, por el por qué nos estamos organizando. Y en ese orden de idea, venimos avanzando. No es fácil tenerlos a todos porque, les explico, lo puede ser que los capacitemos, ellos vayan aprendiendo, pero que como es un sector precarizado, los compañeros se aburren y buscan otro trabajo, un trabajo que por lo menos les dé derecho, un trabajo donde tengan por lo menos su salario fijo, porque en el sector de plataforma se vive del día a día, de lo que uno haga el día, es de eso lo que uno vive, porque el derecho al descanso tampoco lo hay, un día que uno no trabaje es un día que uno deja de producir, y eso ha sido, como quien dice, otro de los retos que tenemos en el tema organizativo, pero ya dentro del sindicato.
Thank you so much, brother. I really appreciate that. Given the time, I would like to give each of our panelists 1 minute for any final inputs they may have or closing thoughts they might have, and then I'll do a couple of minutes of wrap up and we'll close. So since we have you up on the screen right now, Joniel, I'll turn to you again. If you want to give just 1 minute of closing remarks or final inputs you'd like to leave our audience and our participants with today, the floor is yours.
Básicamente sería en pensar la manera de buscar la inclusión de la población migrante. No se trata solamente de crear espacios donde se hable de los problemas, de los desafíos, de los retos que tiene la población migrante, no solamente en Colombia, sino en el mundo, porque sabemos que hay migración en todas partes del mundo. Estos espacios ciertamente son buenos, pero buscar la manera de que lo que se discuta, lo que se hable, lo que se opine, se convierta en hechos. ¿Bien? Ciertamente sabemos que no es fácil poder organizar, poder prestar el apoyo que necesita la población migrante en las diferentes partes del mundo, sino crear esa agenda que les comenté, esa agenda de derecho, tanto en lo económico, en lo cultural, en lo educativo, en lo laboral, que es prácticamente lo que nos une, lo que nos trae esta mañana, esta reunión acá, en el tema laboral. Sabemos que existe mucha población que por la necesidad acepta cualquier tipo de trabajo sin importar el tipo de paga que vaya a tener, el horario que vaya a cumplir, sino ciertamente por la necesidad están en esos trabajos de esclavitud, siendo vulnerados sus derechos como tales. Esa es la invitación y espero poder seguir participando y estamos aquí a la orden aquí en Colombia para lo que se necesite.
Thank you, brother. I'll go to Jasmine next. 1 minute, please.
Hello. Actually, when I'm reading the questions about the main challenges, it's hard to say only two main challenges because in organizing work for migrant domestic worker in destination country is not really that easy. And there were so many challenges and the struggles, and this is endless. So what I would like to say is our organizing work is continuously giving labor education training to enhance our organizing skills, campaign skills, and policy advocacy skills. Because after the training, there must be a practice of what we have learned and sharing with others. Because of these learnings, our members are bravely representing through our union in the destination countries on how to negotiate about their rights and how they can protect their rights. So it's like we take the union to the workers to reach out the migrant domestic worker, because we believe that the union is not only for complaints. It is also a place which encourages the workers to stand up for themselves and find their own voice. So it's not only union, but we have also emotional support, and it's like a sisterhood. So in our organizing, we started to do small actions. And for us, this is very important, even if it seems small. If you are nurtured or nurturing as a leader, nurturing the member, they will feel your thoughtfulness. And thoughtfulness reminded us the power of compassion. So the way even simple gestures can ease someone's sufferings, life stories and experiences of migrant domestic workers teaches us kindness costs nothing but means everything, and helping those workers in need, no matter how small the effort, can leave a lasting impact, can bring a light to someone's darkest day, and this is also a way to build power to demand for social change. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll move to Jane. I know, Jane, you're in a car, so if you're able to go 1 minute, please.
Yes, sorry for my background. I don't know what is happening. So I would like to add, for the CTSP, we set up, because we think that we should have a dedicated place for migrant workers. We set up a migrant research center, MRC, where migrant workers can meet, socialize, and report their problems, etc. And we set up the MRC with the collaboration of the Industrial Global Union and Anti-Slavery International and ASUS, a brand that everybody knows. And then I'm happy to say also that we have an application which is called the Just Good Work Mauritius, which is you can download from Google and Google Play, I think. So you can check it out, where workers, it's in different languages, where workers can know about their rights and where to go if ever they have any issue. And then I'm happy to say also that yesterday we had a special celebration in the context of Migrant Day, where all the countries that I've mentioned came to our MRC, and we had about 125 people who came. And before the activity started, we played a national anthem for each country, and it was really a very emotional, activity where those people, they stand up when their national anthem was playing, and they were singing while we were playing the song on the TV. But I must say that everything is not that great. We have many challenges, and you know that recently we had a report on Mauritius, which is not good at all, concerning migrant workers in the textile and garment sector, where it is reported that there is human trafficking in a report that was produced by Transparentem. I think everybody knows about that. And this is not good for Mauritius at all. And we are working on that report with the government so that we can improve the working conditions of migrant workers. But as in every country, we have many challenges, and we need to strive very hard to support workers, because wherever you are and you are called a worker, be it migrant or local, you are a worker, and we need to protect your rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Very tight on time, but Edwin and then Mikyung.
Yeah, I can be very short, because I think being very keen on supply chain strategy, supply chain human rights strategy can have a very, very fruitful added value in redesigning the life of labor migrants and preventing issues that take place. And what we see in the Netherlands and in road transport is, besides everything we already do, if you open your view to this, it can be very inspiring and also really help designing fundamental changes. I think that was 20 seconds.
Amazing, Edwin. Thank you. Mikyung, to close us out.
Yeah, I'd like to join Edwin in emphasizing the importance of the supply chain strategy. And I'd like to emphasize the importance of the migrant workers' rights for the safe and healthy working environment as a fundamental labor rights, because recently there was a big accident, the fire in a lithium battery production facility, and out of 23 victims, 19 was migrant workers, and the OSH for the migrant workers top of the social issues in Korea. So to address this, we have to emphasize not only for the freedom of association, but also the health and safety working environment as a fundamental right, and the strategy to introduce a mandatory due diligence for the supply chain for the big companies can serve in these activities.
Thank you, Mikyung. And for me, I'm going to say goodbye and hand it over to Paula to close us out. Just a reminder that, of course, in 2025, we have Global Compact on Migration Regional Reviews. We have the Global Forum on Migration and Development Summit. We have COP. We have much to discuss as a trade union movement and as migrant worker solidarity activists. So I'm looking forward to working with you next year. And Paula, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Todd. I think you said already the key things for 2025. Indeed, this was an amazing conversation. Thank you very much, and thanks to Todd for the moderation. This will be all reflected and captured in the forthcoming ITUC policy brief on organizing migrant workers that will be published next year, so stay tuned. It will be available on our website. And of course, we will keep working both on raising the voice of trade unions and migrant workers in the key fora, as Todd said, in the Global Forum on Migration and Development within the UN on the Global Compact on Migration, and then also COP and any other relevant arena that will be in our radar. And at the same time, we will keep our engagement in supporting our affiliates in exchanging good practices, lessons learned, exactly like we have done today, in order to strengthen and to support trade unions' engagement in supporting migrant worker rights, and also, to learn from one another. And because, of course, this is key, also looking at the, when there are these cross boundaries, cross countries, collaboration, like the examples that have been presented today, which really are based on the international solidarity and support across countries and amongst trade unions. So let me stop here because we really concluded our time. Thanks again, a big applause to our speakers and colleagues, and to all the audience. I hope you have enjoyed it like we did. And also let me conclude thanking also the Equality team for putting this all together, Irem and Carmen, and also our interpreters. Thank you very much. Have a lovely festive seasons ahead of us, and let's keep tuned. Bye-bye.
Bye. Good evening. Thank you.
Bye.